Look, guys, you don't need reminding that the PlayStation Vita did not sell 2 billion units, only managed 1 billion. PlayStation's second and tragically final handheld deserved a better fate than the one it received. That's hard to argue with. But even if Sony gave up the ghost faster than I gave up hopes of ever getting on most rides at Alton Towers, it also cannot be argued that the handheld did have a ton of brilliant, often extremely underrated games. Here then are the 50 PlayStation Vita games that are royally worth your time. So we're not going to sit here and try and tell you that PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale is some kind of unsung fighting game masterpiece that people were too harsh on after launch. It's not, but it is the only game in the world that lets you pit Kratos against Fat Princess. It's a wonder that Death Battle managed to outlive this game, because how can you top that? Basically Smash, but PlayStation, and also reboot Dante for some cursed reason. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale is not as good as the games it's very much trying to emulate, but there is definitely a lot of fun to be had here. The matchups are mental, and there's plenty to do and unlock, and it all runs pretty alright on the Vita as well. It's just a good time. I'll never get over them cancelling the Legend of Dragoon DLC though. What happens when you cross god simulation, strategy, and rhythm action elements? Firstly, something weird, let's be clear, but you also end up with a game like Augur Rhythm, a game so bananas that it could only end up on the PlayStation Vita. Say what you want about Sony's ill-fated handheld, but there's some genuine ingenuity and creativity on offer in its library that feels missing today. You play as the God of Light and must command the god and their troops through rhythmic button presses, fighting against the dark forces of your brother in the process. This Vita effort from the Octopath and Tenchu guys is a bit of a strange one, and one you'd have to play in order to truly attempt to understand it. Might be for you though. The idea of a platformer incorporating music and rhythm gameplay might seem old hats these days, but when Sound Shapes launched on the PS Vita, it felt like we'd been shown a brand new way to experience a classic genre. Instead of just running and jumping through basic levels, you're instead given a bunch of beautiful worlds backed by some incredible music from the likes of Beck and Deadmau5. Remember Deadmau5? While the levels that the game provides are great on their own, something that really sets Sound Shapes apart from other platformers is the fact that players can create their own levels and soundscapes too. There's even support for the PS Vita's touch controls, making it tailor-made for the handheld. One of the best things about the Tales of series is that because of how long it's been going for across so many platforms, there's always one you never knew about before that people can recommend. Take for instance Tales of Hearts R, which gave Western RPG players a chance to experience a previously Japanese-only RPG remade with new features and the like. An action RPG in classic Tales fashion, the game follows core Meteor and Kohaku Hearts, two improbably named weirdos who happen to get into a spot of bother. Specifically, Kohaku's heart gets shattered, leading to a world-spanning adventure to pick up the pieces. It's not the deepest or best Tales game ever, but it is still pretty underrated. This game might have launched on the PS Vita as Stealth Inc. A Clone in the Dark, but we massively prefer the original PC release name of Stealth Bastard Tactical Espionage Arsehole. It just speaks to us as fellow sweary British tossers. This is a loving send-up to the stealth genre, wrapped up in the one more go style of gameplay you'd expect from the likes of Super Meat Boy. We'll get to that one. The premise is basic enough, as you play as a clone in a testing facility trying to sneak through one of dozens of levels. Throughout the game, more mechanics and obstacles are introduced, ramping up the difficulty before you're wondering if Metal Gear Solid would actually be easier on you. Legendary designer Keiji Inafune is a game developer with a more storied first half of his career than second, and while there's been such duds as Mighty No. 9, Inafune also served as a designer for great games like Soul Sacrifice. A co-op focused action RPG, the core mechanic of Soul Sacrifice was that sacrificing. If you took too much damage to a body part, you could sacrifice it to activate a powerful spell, but incur a penalty as a result. While the original Soul Sacrifice launched on the Vita anyway in 2013, Delta served as a standalone deluxe edition with new weapons, classes, enemies, and a whole new faction. It's the definitive version of a weird yet wonderful RPG experience, a testament to the Vita's ingenuity. A while ago we put out a video about PS1 games you didn't know had sequels, and wouldn't you know it, Ashoka Tainted Bloodlines fits that bill. A follow-up to 1999's Ore no Shikabane o Koete UK, which didn't receive any release outside of Japan, not even the PSP remake. Ore Shika is set 100 years later and has nothing to do with the original game. Oh, that makes things easier at least. It's set in the midst of feudal Japan, with an art style designed to evoke the styles of that time period, but it is the gameplay that really is compelling here. Players defeat enemies and earn points used to marry deities and sire children with increased stats. From there, you're off to create the strongest bloodline since Roman Reigns turned heel. Guys, we don't usually do this, but it's hard to pick which one out of the two of these is actually the best PS Vita entry in the series, and they go pretty well together as a duology, so you've got them both. If you want to experience some of the best RPG action on the PS Vita, you could do a hell of a lot worse than both the Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel games. Both games follow a military academy student who has to find his place amidst a burgeoning civil war, which he does through turn-based combat, of course. The first game has school schedule mechanics similar to Persona, but the second game isn't bound by that. Both are still incredible games though, so do check them out. Ubisoft might not be going through their best phase at the minute, especially considering they'll happily cancel a Prince of Persia remake but continue supporting Skull and Bones. But years ago they'd take a swing on some much smaller games. Child of Light was one such game and feels like an RPG that's been completely forgotten about in the years since, and that's a shame. A turn-based RPG using the Ubi art framework, Child of Light follows a child who must bring the sun, the moon and the stars back to the land of Lemuria after they were stolen by the Queen of the Night. It's a side-scrolling RPG with ATB mechanics and a genuinely emotional story. While Child of Light is available on other platforms, it really just feels at home on the Vita. Sony clearly wanted to steal some of Nintendo's success with the party games they developed for the PS3 and Vita, considering they developed PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale to try and emulate Smash Bros. They even tried to ape Mario Kart with Mod Nation Racers, but the Vita sequel, Road Trip, wasn't well received. You know who did ape Nintendo well on the Vita though? Sega, specifically with Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing Transformed. Sonic's third racing game, second one with karts involved, where on my Sonic R heads at. Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing Transformed introduced land, air and water racing into the mix, oftentimes on the same track, meaning laps were always chaotic. A healthy mix of single player and multiplayer modes helped cement this Sonic racer as a Vita must-have. A game many years in the making owing to just how difficult it is to make a game when you're mostly on your lonesome, Iconoclasts feels remarkably fresh and modern despite being in the oven for so long and doffing its hat to the SNES platformers of old. Where Iconoclasts really starts to distinguish itself is in its mechanic. Your protagonist, Robin, has use of a wrench which can be used to attack enemies but also solve puzzles, as well as many other trinkets down the line. With an intriguing and subtly dystopian storyline, as well as welcome periods of levity, Iconoclasts may be one of the last great games to release on the Vita. There's been an almost countless amount of RPG franchises over the years, but the East series seems to just quietly trundle along even if it doesn't get the same level of notoriety or success as others like, Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. Now, technically, East 8 was originally only a PS Vita release in Japan, but the Western Vita version did arrive a year later in 2017, along with other platforms right as the Vita was, well, bombing. No wonder then that this is an overlooked Vita release. Shame though, as this is a pretty bloody good game. Refining the action RPG style of the East series, this 8th installment in the main series continues to follow the adventures of Adol and his party as they find themselves shipwrecked on a remote island. We promised that we didn't mean to clump them together, but Freedom Wars is another example of an action RPG finding a home on the Vita. It's also one of the most ambitious action RPGs on the platform, offering co-op missions and consistent online faction warfare that makes the game feel like Devil May Cry meets Clash of Clans. Set 100,000 years in the future, where being born is a sin worthy of a million years in prison, humans are confined to panopticons and forced to fight robots. Players then compete to see which panopticon has raised the most resources, meaning you've got to work together to succeed. Really great stuff, but unfortunately servers are kaput on the Vita, but it is available on other modern platforms thanks to a HD port. Housemarque might have earned their reputation as bullet hell gods in the PS5 era thanks to Returnal and presumably Saros. We're writing this before Saros has come out, but we're assuming it whips. Still, Housemarque's history with bullet hell bangers dates back to the PS3 days with Super Stardust HD, itself a follow-up to a game developed by Housemarque's predecessor studio, Bloodhouse. But Resogun is arguably the best of the bunch. Resogun is as basic as it gets really. You've got two sticks, use them to move and shoot around a circular arena until the screen is clear of enemies and projectiles, and don't let innocent people die. It is a simple loop, but it is very effective. With lots of weapons, power-ups and explosions, this is a Vita showcase piece through and through. You may be more familiar with Drinkbox's Severed as a Nintendo title after seeing it pop up on the 3DS, Wii U and later the Switch, but it actually began life as a Vita exclusive. As with so many games that were originally only available on the handheld however, it had to find a new home to reach the audience it deserved. Beautiful to look at and with a heart that cannot be denied, Severed pits you as a warrior lost in an unusual world. You must use the touchscreen to attack your enemies and sever their limbs, which gives the game a strange but entirely welcome vibe of Fruit Ninja meets Dead Space. Severed is a really underrated dungeon crawler from a studio who pretty much always deliver. If you haven't owned Downwell on at least one platform, you really ought to fix that, as it's one of the smoothest action platformers going. You may actually be saving yourself though, it's so addictive despite being so basic on the eye that you'll be cursing frogs and gravity before too long, completely unable to make it past the first few levels. While Downwell is tough, it retains a pick up and play appeal that's hard to resist. You effectively fall your way down through levels and kill enemies with your trusted gumboots to eventually reach the end goal with plenty of power-ups along the way. Its levels are procedurally generated and the replayability infinite, so that's a hell of a lot of bang for your buck. Well, technically $2 or £2. Downwell is also really on the cheap side. Do you remember Tempest? Possibly the most popular example of a tube shooter, Tempest was developed by a guy called Jeff Minter when he worked with Atari before going on to found Llamasoft. Llamasoft would then release TXK, a Tempest-inspired tube shooter that was released exclusively for the PlayStation Vita. If you haven't heard of it, it's because other platform releases were cancelled thanks to Atari threatening legal action. Isn't that fun? As a game, TXK is just Tempest, but with power-ups, more psychedelic visuals and a great soundtrack, but somehow that combination makes TXK feel like the perfect Vita game. If you're wondering how the Minter and Atari situation worked out though, he did end up working with them on Tempest 4000 down the line. Some, or really well, a lot of indie games flop when they launch, but others seemingly go from strength to strength as time goes on. Crypt of the Necrodancer is unquestionably the latter, considering Nintendo ultimately took notice of developers Brace Yourself Games and asked them to create a Zelda-inspired spiritual successor to Necrodancer called Cadence of Hyrule. Pretty successful if you ask us, and its Vita port is a part of it. A top-down roguelike blend of dungeon crawling and rhythm action combat, players can only move and attack on beat, but the enemies are also confined to the beat too. After each run, you can earn permanent upgrade to make subsequent runs easier and easier, making it a great first roguelike for people to enjoy, and it feels right at home on the Vita as well. Most people probably know of Supergiant's work from the excellent Hades and its sequel, but they'd been releasing bangers for a decade before Zagreus came along. Just look at their debut game, Bastion. If isometric action RPGs are your thing, and if you love Hades, they probably are, Bastion is right up your alley. Playing as the kid, you awaken in a ruined city after an event known as the Calamity, so you try to find other survivors and the titular Bastion in an attempt to figure out the cause of the Calamity and a way to reverse it. Players blast through levels, carving a path through enemies before returning home to level up and upgrade equipment. It's bite-sized fun, making for an ideal Vita game. Check out Pyre, by the way, very underrated. Don't Starve proved that survival games don't necessarily have to be first-person affairs a la Ark or The Forest. If you want to instead, you can create an almost top-down survival game instead that still features all of the hardcore trappings of the survival genre. If managing your heat, hunger, and even your sanity amidst an onslaught of nightmare creatures from another dimension sounds like a good time to you, Don't Starve on the Vita is pretty essential. Like other games we've mentioned on this list though, Don't Starve on the Vita is somewhat hamstrung by the fact other platforms have seen more DLC over the years. If you need multiplayer for this one, do check out Don't Starve Together on other platforms, but Don't Starve on the Vita is already pretty fun on its own. We are not going to deny that the PlayStation Vita sure did have a lot of roguelikes, though Risk of Rain 1 might have been more slept on. It laid down the franchise's foundations, but it was the 3D sequel, Risk of Rain 2, that really made the roguelike a household name. Still, that doesn't mean that the first Risk of Rain on the Vita isn't worth your time. Functionally, Risk of Rain doesn't change much going from 1 to 2, aside from adding a new dimension, as the first game is still about blasting through levels and trying to find new loot. Enemies get harder the longer you play for though, so the balancing act becomes how much do you want to loot versus how much risk, are you willing to take on? Salt and Sanctuary might have been PS4 first, but this Dark Souls inspired 2D Metroidvania belongs on a handheld. What can we say? There's something about 2D platformers and handhelds that just works for us. Another ultra hard platformer where you're going to have to be careful not to yeeter your Vita. This is for those who relish a challenge. Players control a warrior who finds themselves on a mysterious island that's filled with items to find and enemies to either kill or be slaughtered by. With a huge skill tree and a ton of weapons and armor to find and choose from, the ability to craft your own build here is massive, which is good news for anyone who loves to watch numbers get bigger. A series that made its name on PlayStation handhelds, we could talk about Danganronpa 1 and 2, which were both ported to the Vita. They were originally PSP titles though, so we're focusing instead on Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony, which was developed with the PS Vita in mind. Still, if you prefer the first two bangers, just pretend we're talking about them instead. They are also bangers. The continuation of the Killing Game visual novel / detective series, players must try to solve murders by finding evidence and using them in chaotic debate sequences. As the game progresses, you'll find out more information on the characters involved and why they found themselves in the Killing Game to begin with. Spoilers, it's not because they fed too many puppies. Vanillaware might be best known for their more recent work on the likes of 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim or Unicorn Overlord, but they've been quietly putting out bangers since the PS2's Odin Sphere. Not content to rest on their laurels though, Vanillaware would revisit this forgotten gem years later, creating the remake Leifthrashir as a result, improving on the core formula massively. The game follows a group of characters, each of whom have their own role to play in a war between kingdoms over a powerful weapon, with the game itself playing like a 2D side-scrolling RPG. This remade version contains everything the base game had, only with added skills and abilities, making it a more complete package. It's also twice as hard to pronounce. Leifthrashir. Yeah. It's strange that Dragon Quest builders would ultimately be responsible for Pokemon's newest smash hit, Pokopia. That might seem like an unrelated attribution until you realise that Dragon Quest builders literally laid the foundation for Pokopia to thrive from years later. Not that DQB isn't a success in its own right, of course, it's just that people tend to forget about the original and skip straight to the sequel. Dragon Quest builders takes its inspiration from Minecraft, with builders set in an alternate version of the original game where the villain won. Now it's on you as the builder to repair the world, town by town, setting the stage for the next hero to come along and beat the villain once and for all. Tetris might be the premier game about falling blocks being cleared from a board, but those in the know will tell you that Lumines deserves more love than it gets. At least it finally has its own Tetris Effect style game in Lumines Arise, but before that, it had been a long 13 years since the previous Lumines game, Electric Symphony. Place clear coloured squares off a board which drop one at a time in 2x2 formation of different colours. Once players match 2x2 squares of the same colour, they're cleared from the board when the timeline sweeps over it, but bigger shapes equals more points. It's simple enough, but when you've got the music and background going all at once, it is pretty absorbing, like few other puzzle games really. The other UbiArt example on this list, in a world more just and fair than ours, we'd have more Rayman games using the formula of Rayman Origins and Legends than just the two. While both are available on the Vita, we're going for the sequel Legends just simply because it includes pretty much every level from the first game as unlockables, along with a brand new campaign on top. A gorgeous platformer with some of the best mechanics in the genre's history, Rayman Legends sees the limitless wonder racing through several new and varied worlds, rescuing lums and the like with up to 4 players. With new musical levels that are highly entertaining and optional touchscreen controls, this is peak Vita gaming. And now for the other vanillaware banger on the Vita that shouldn't be ignored. Dragon's Crown is an utterly wonderful fantasy-inspired beat-em-up that feels like the closest we're ever getting to a Dungeons & Dragons Shadows over Mystara spiritual successor. It's just that this game happens to be a lot meatier than that classic arcade beat-em-up, and we're not just talking about the bloody Amazon's proportions. A beat-em-up for up to 4 players, Dragon's Crown has players choose from one of 6 adventurers as they find themselves in the Kingdom of Highland. Here they travel to one of several different regions at a time, delving into dungeons and finding rare loot before heading back to town to upgrade. A simple formula, but a winning formula. Another example of a series that we really should be seeing more of. It's a shame that Studio Liverpool would be shut down by Sony after the release of Wipeout 2048, a prequel for the series which optimistically predicts we'll be seeing high-speed anti-gravity racing in the next 22 years and not just the opening scene of Terminator 1. Wipeout for the Vita still retained the key hallmarks of the series: fast racing and thumping beats. Players race around several tracks set within one specific city as the game's campaign chronicles the first 3 years of the Anti-Gravity Racing Championships. You'll battle for position, using weapons picked up off the track to achieve supremacy in one of the most gorgeous games on the Vita. 2064 is a great example of some games just being a great fit on the Vita. A point-and-click title with a more than steady cult following, it pits you as a journalist who is trying to do their job in a world that seems split on technology, the pros and the cons. This is all relayed through the game's spirited humour and bloody lovely pixel visuals. While those who are after some grand challenging affair will be left a bit wanting, 2064 excels in the small stories concerning the game's many affable characters. It's an eclectic bunch all paired wonderfully with established names and voice acting. Combine that with a good heart and some very catchy music, and you have a quaint but worthwhile time waiting for you on your Vita. Papers, Please was the game that let everyone know that bureaucracy could genuinely be compelling sometimes. You just had to have your digital family's lives hanging in the balance. No pressure. Set in the fictional country of Arstotzka, you control an immigration officer responsible for checking who can cross the border or not. As the days progress, the requirements get stricter while your loyalties become tested. As anyone who's played this brilliant game in the past will no doubt attest, the screen gets cluttered quickly with documentation and the like, so playing on the Vita might seem counterintuitive, but you remember it's touchscreen enabled. It's actually such a natural fit and is simply unmissable on the Vita. It feels like Terraria has always played second fiddle to Minecraft, but those who love the game swear by it, even over other competitors. If that's not a better metaphor for PlayStation Vita lovers, we don't know what is. So unintentionally, the match of the PlayStation Vita and Terraria seems serendipitous. Admittedly, the Vita version of Terraria hasn't aged best, or at least it hasn't if you've been keeping up with the other versions, as support with the Vita version stopped a long time ago. However, the Vita version is still a complete experience with hundreds of pieces of loot to find, creatures to slay, and gear to craft. The scale of Terraria has always been staggering, so the fact it works on the Vita is just brilliant. And hey, it's a lot more fun than Minecraft on the Vita. Completely unabashed about taking inspiration from Metroid, Axiom Verge has become a cult favourite indie in recent years, as well as a bit of a touchstone in indie game development history. And that's not just because it was the next best thing to a brand new 2D Samus adventure, but also because it builds and contemporises the experience while also delivering plenty of unique mechanics and innovations of its own. Made presumably during a heavy binge on hallucinogenic drugs, Axiom Verge sees you playing as a scientist who awakens somewhere that feels entirely alien. By unlocking new abilities and even deforming the world around you, you'll get utterly lost in this LSD nightmare that's a total dream to play on your Vita. One of the first games to really embrace the retro revolution on modern platforms, Shovel Knight looks and plays every inch the Nintendo classic, just with a bit more welcome silliness in the fact that your protagonist has a shovel. Hey, at least nobody can say that its name is misleading as you spike downwards and dig your enemies an early grave. For featuring a ton of extra content and somehow still giving back to its audience so long after its release, Shovel Knight feels completely at home on the Vita. It's a tough time, though you should come to expect that from basically any retro-style platformer. Dig this one up in your PlayStation Store library and lose yourself for hours on end, then go play all the other Shovel Knight stuff that nobody really wanted. One of the most influential indie games of all time feels right at home on the Vita. It's infuriatingly tight platforming, the perfect antidote for your constipation while you're sat on the bug. That just one more try appeal has made it a classic and comes with cross-save so you can continue Anguish on the go. So why is it so low down relatively? Well, it's not the best way to experience the game as the Vita sticks are not quite fine enough to make the inch-perfect leaps you'd find on a controller, or that's the excuse I used anyway. Still, that's something for you to acclimate to and overcome on your quest to beat the meat in what is one of the simplest but most devilishly addictive games ever made. Mortal Kombat needed a big win when it rebooted itself in 2011, and boy, did it deliver. Establishing the newly minted NetherRealm Studios team as a force to be reckoned with, MK 2011, or just MK9, was a phenomenal game, so of course it was going to be ported to every platform under the sun, the PlayStation Vita included. It took them a year, but what makes this version special is how it utilised the Vita's own features to enhance the experience. Mortal Kombat for the PS Vita includes the same story content and modes as the original release, but the challenge tower has been refitted to include touch and tilt controls, making for more interactive minigames, including having to literally wipe blood off your screen. You want to play Fruit Ninja with someone's head? Well, now you can. The cult classic Metroidvania suplexed its way onto the Vita and then promptly into our hearts. While its sequel may technically and mechanically be a better game, there's no faulting the original Guacamelé's goofy humour and downplayed but pretty stunning visuals. Guacamelee is the perfect game for a train ride, hitting that perfect spot between being long enough to last and not so short that it ends so soon. Basically the perfect game to just pick up and play. There's also a lot of replayability with Guacamelee thanks to just how endearing it is to play. The protagonist, Juan, a terribly out of shape luchador, is a likeable guy, but a lot of the fun from the game comes from the interactions with the hilarious bad guys and even chickens. Bursting with secrets and tidy combat, Guacamelee is yours for a pittance and worth every penny. Also known as Baby's first roguelike, largely because you're actually playing as a baby, The Binding of Isaac is a game that probably doesn't need an introduction at this point. You play as a baby, you fight through a bunch of randomly generated dungeons, and you spend the majority of the time making a disgusted look on your face because of how gross the things on screen are. Much like Terraria earlier, the Vita version of Isaac has been dated by the lack of DLC support other versions currently have, but if you've never played Isaac before, there's still about 100 hours of content waiting here for you if you're masochistic enough. The Binding of Isaac isn't an easy game, but at least you'll have an easier time of it than Isaac himself. Oh, poor little Big Planet. After initially setting the imaginations of gamers young and old alike when it first landed on the PlayStation 3, it eventually sputtered towards relative obscurity with Sony not supporting it anymore, and then it kinda just died and we lost a generation of creativity. It's a shame because the experience is like a shot of joy straight to the heart, seen perfectly with its Vita version. Little Big Planet on the Vita, or Little Big Planet PS Vita to give it its official name, took what has made the series so charming and minimised it for a handheld. Almost boundless creativity awaits you with touch controls spicing up the formula, as well as the fact that it's a potentially bottomless well of possibilities. Well, I'd be saying that if they hadn't killed off the online. Unfairly overlooked by critics at launch for not moving the dial enough, Killzone Mercenary may lack the bombast of its PlayStation 3 brethren, but it's quite easily the best FPS game on the Vita. The controls transfer well to the small screen, and it makes inventive uses of the handheld gimmicks to make something that feels as exciting as playing a shooter on your TV. The story is a bit of an oddity in the Killzone timeline, pitting you as a mercenary during key moments of the conflict with the Hellgast. Mercenary also has great multiplayer, and you will surprisingly still be able to find some, admittedly, half-empty matches this far down the line if you want to go down the unofficial route. The sound of a confirmed kill is also worth the price of admission on its own. Pure dopamine each bloody time. An acclaimed but not wildly commercially successful hybrid of ship-based gameplay and side-scrolling, Velocity 2X might actually best be first discovered on the Vita. It's a game that you constantly dip in and out of, the experience regularly refreshing thanks to its inventive mechanics that never allow you to rest on one aspect of it for too long. The origins of Velocity 2X actually run deep in the PlayStation brand with a PlayStation Mini, remember those, game by the name of Velocity. Since then, FutureLab have updated and refined the experience until they arrived at 2X, which is one of the smoothest and most downright beautiful games you're ever likely to play on a handheld. And yes, these are the same guys that were behind Power Wash Simulator. Power to them, I guess. Really, the ability to pit Deadpool against Beautiful Joe from the palm of your hands should be enough to sell you on picking up Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 for your Vita, not even considering the fact that many believe it to be the best Marvel vs. Capcom game on the market. Well, it's certainly better than Infinite, but that is not hard, is it? The gameplay transfers wonderfully to the Vita. The cel-shaded visuals make everything pop just as much on the small screen as it would the big. UMVC3 also makes good use of the Vita's touchscreen, though nothing can match the conventional controls. Whether you're a casual player or die-hard fighting game fanatic, UMVC3 should be your first port of call on the Vita as one of the best superhero games around. Rogue Legacy is an insanely addictive side-scroller that is as hard to put down as it is irreverent. You play as a knight storming a mysterious castle housing plenty of bad things for you to slay, and then you die. On your next run you play as a descendant of your previous character who has their own powers and drawbacks. It's one of the best Vita games at making you love to hate it, in a good way of course. This constantly maintains a feeling of freshness to Rogue Legacy, so that even if you're entering the castle for the 500th time, and you probably will, the wonders that await you never get any less intriguing. It's an understated and underrated gem that will have you utterly hooked, even when the cards are against you. The sequel on other platforms is also pretty damn good. Another super innovative game that had to leave its home to find the players the Vita couldn't quite provide. Tearaway is a charming platformer from the pioneers of the Little Big Planet franchise. Media Molecule certainly know how to create gorgeous and cute games with an undeniable charm, and Tearaway certainly fits that bill. Just like their marquee franchise, Media Molecule rewards the player for their experimentation and creativity in Tearaway, making the game feel like a toy box just begging to be played with. Tearaway even makes the touchscreen feel more than a gimmick, asking players to peel back its paper world and dive right in. Unfolded on PS4 is a good way to experience the game, though Tearaway is simply just at home on the PlayStation Vita. An indisputable indie classic, Spelunky is a lo-fi whale of a time that feels custom made for the Vita. Many modern indie games owe a debt to Spelunky, the work of mainly one guy, for reinvigorating and redefining the platformer by introducing old school elements to a new school experience, which includes randomized levels and eggplants. Spelunky just keeps on giving, offering new challenges and quirks that you weren't previously aware of the deeper into it you go. That's apt, because you spend your time in the game travelling deep underground on the hunt for treasure and crying with beautiful remorse when you attack a shopkeeper and find that the rest of your game is utterly ruined. Seriously, don't mess with them. It's hard being a small business. Ever found RPGs stressful? That you aren't quite powerful enough to beat a boss, or that you don't have the items you need? You should probably approach Darkest Dungeon with some caution then, as it puts the end in friendship with alarming regularity, ridding you of your favourite party members over and over again. Anyone who's played XCOM will recognise the jarring permadeath in Darkest Dungeon, but when paired with the game's strict insanity mechanics, the task becomes even greater. Allow one of your party members to descend too deeply into darkness, and they will be lost, which makes every action and tough decision in Darkest Dungeon feel far weightier. Is glory worth death? Is the second game as good? No. Do you like hurting people while straining one out? Then allow us to introduce you to Hotline Miami, an effortlessly stylish top-down shooter that rewards patience when it comes to mastering doors. Like many games we've talked about today, Hotline Miami is irresistible because it's not only pick up and play, but also impossible to put down once you get going. Bolstered by a synthwave soundtrack that is the stuff of legend, and a gloriously 80s aesthetic, this is one murder puzzler, no, that's really what it is, that should be ticked off your list. The second game is also really good, if a bit imbalanced sometimes. Someone at Naughty Dog clearly loves Hotline Miami though, as it can be seen being played during The Last of Us Part 2 in a less than subtle nod to both games' themes. While it's true that Golden Abyss may try to use too many of the Vita's unique features all at once, the fact remains the same that it's the perfect pocket-sized adventure for Nathan Drake. Only minimally downsizes the scale of the Uncharted console adventures to create something that feels like a bit of a technical marvel, really. A lot of simple joy can be had from drawing the destination for Drake as he's climbing or swiping to leap across a gap. The controls are also tight and the combat just as fun as its big appears. The story is great with some fun supporting characters that we never see again, even if it takes a little while to really get going. It's probably never going to get ported at this point, so if you're picking up a Vita, don't overlook this underrated gem in the franchise. Here's one final, brilliant, wonderful one-time Vita exclusive that didn't find the audience it deserved, so much so that its sequel actually went on to become a PS4 exclusive. It's a shame because Gravity Rush arguably suits the Vita more than its bigger and more successful brother, allowing you to mess with gravity and kick some arse from the palm of your hand. An out-and-out wacky time, Gravity Rush sees you playing as a young girl aided by a cat made of galaxies, please bear with me, to stop the destruction of a mysterious world. Thanks to its gorgeous cell shading and unique gravity shifting mechanics, Gravity Rush really deserved to shift more copies than it did as a game that's closely associated with the underrated nature of the Vita as a whole, and it's well worth playing today. But the best Vita game ever is, of course, the aforementioned Vita JRPG that will completely consume your being. I mentioned it 20 minutes ago. Persona 4 Golden isn't something that you can play, you just have to open it up and climb right inside. When a body turns up in an otherwise quiet town, you must discover the truth by diving into televisions and taking on enemies with your high school friends while listening to the most dangerously funky soundtrack of all time. Weird, yes, and it's all the better for it. Persona is a franchise that's all about the creeping, slow burn, you going from being vaguely interested in its story and characters and then suddenly deciding that you would, in fact, die for some of these weirdos. There's at least 100 hours of content here in a game that just grows the more you play it. Bear with its methodical pacing, especially at the start, and you'll be trying to climb inside your 4K TV before you even realise what's happening. The remake has got a lot to live up to. Outro Gang, did you catch the cheeky little corner of memory throwback in the intro? We used to use it all the time. I thought it'd be a nice little hint as to what the number one will be. Did you have any other games on the Vita that we haven't included that you loved? Anything too high, anything too low? Let us know down below. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. It's been good to have you, and I'll catch you when I catch you.